All right, we're giving just a couple of more seconds for some other folks to join us. To all of you who have joined us already, thank you so much for coming today. Again, my name is Shaunis Mercer, and I am one of the owners here at Peaceful Law. And we will get started here in just another minute. All right. Well, thanks everybody for coming today. I am so glad that you've decided to join us, and please feel free to take notes during the presentation. But we will be sending out a follow-up with you afterwards with the recording so that you can rewatch this whenever you want to. If it helps to get a second chance at being able to absorb this information. I know sometimes that's helpful for me. I just want to sit back and listen the first time, and then be able to go back later and take any notes that I need to. So feel free just to listen however you're comfortable today. And then certainly we'll, at the end, be sure to let you know how you can schedule a follow-up meeting, a one-on-one strategy meeting, to have a conversation with one of the attorneys here. And we'll be glad to be able to help you to get started. So now that we've given everybody a chance to get in, we will go ahead and I'll just tell you a little bit more about our firm, because one of the first questions I get is peaceful law. That's like a really weird concept to think about divorce and peaceful and lawyers and peaceful and all of the things that we do here. So the way that the firm came about was, I've been practicing family law here in North Carolina for 19 years now. And I spent some time practicing out on the West Coast as well. And on the West Coast, a lot of cases are handled amicably. And a lot of cases here in North Carolina are handled amicably as well. During my career, I had the opportunity to sort of see both ways of doing it, litigating cases and taking, the more contentious traditional approach to divorce, and then also doing some creative problem solving when I had great attorneys on the other side and figuring out a way to de-escalate the conflict for our clients and to be able to let people save a whole bunch of money, not fighting in court, and also preserve the relationship and honor the dignity of what they had built together, and separate in a way that allowed them to preserve that dignity and really move forward, especially when folks have kids. I think that things can escalate really quickly and it can feel very much like people go into their own camps. But throughout the years, I found that the best approach, especially when you've got children involved, is to find a peaceful way to separate. And the law is pretty clear about a lot of things, but there's also some areas of ambiguity. And I really like giving people the opportunity to figure out what's best for their family on their own terms, without a judge having to dictate to them what's going to happen with their family. So today, the purpose of our meeting today is to spend a little bit of time and talk about, maybe you're just at the beginning stages of considering whether you want to stay in the marriage, whether you want to try to preserve what you've built together, or whether it's time to move on and to find a way to separate. And I will say that being here today, meeting with an attorney, thinking about separation doesn't mean that you're going to get a divorce. So many times people come in to see us and spend some time just getting to know what their rights are, what the process is like, and then they go and they find a different way to move forward together. But they're able to move forward from a place of wanting to work on the relationship. They're not staying frozen in a place of fear. So really, my goal for you today is to walk out of this seminar knowing what likely outcomes would be, what the process looks like, and the things that you need to be considering so that you can go back into your marriage and make the choice of whether you're going to stay or go with eyes wide open. And I think that that's a really fair thing for people to be able to do in relationships, is to be able to evaluate what the right thing is. So the first thing that we're going to talk about today is the emotional and mental aspects of divorce. And I think that that's something that's really important for you to consider when you're deciding if you want to separate or if now is the right time to separate. And so one of the ways that you might think about if you're ready for divorce is to consider how long you've been considering it and what things you've done so far to avoid divorce, because most people don't get married with the idea that you're going to separate, right? Like we all enter into the marriage with the idea that it's forever. But when things start to get bad, what things have you and your partner done to work on the relationship together? So one of my favorite tools that I recommend for people who aren't ready to separate yet is to consider discernment counseling. And discernment counseling is a method of therapy that focuses on helping couples to decide what it is that they want in the relationship. Are they still aligned enough to continue down this path together, or is it time to separate? And so when you go into that type of discernment counseling, you get the opportunity to have sessions separate and then sessions together about where the relationship is headed. And then from there, you can make the decision to move towards a conscious uncoupling or to work towards marriage counseling together to work on strengthening and committing to the marriage again. And so another aspect of this is, if you've already done counseling, if you just know that it's time to separate, you know that you don't want to be with your partner anymore, or your partner has already said that they've made the choice, so it's not up to you whether or not you get to stay together. One of the best things that you can do for yourself is to get some mental health support. So I really support my clients reaching out to therapists. We love connecting our clients with other professionals and taking a holistic approach to their divorce so that they've got that mental health support that they need. So if you're already working with a counselor, it may be a good opportunity to talk to your mental health provider about what you're considering and make sure that you're strong for yourself, because divorce, no matter how amicable it is, still takes a toll on people and their mental health. So having those professionals in place is a really good way to make sure that you've got the support that you need. And it's one of the tools that I like to have in place for my clients before we move forward in the divorce process. So it's always good to have that support system in place. And again, I'm very happy to, whether you become one of our clients or not moving forward, you can always reach out to our office and we're glad to provide you with a list of mental health providers in the area that we found are really supportive and helpful for our clients during this time. And then one of the other things is what I call mindfulness in decision making. So it's one of those things that for all of my big choices that I've made in life, there's this sort of overriding philosophy that I think is really helpful, and that's don't quit on your worst day. So I remember when my first son was a baby and I was struggling with breastfeeding as a new mom. That was the advice that my lactation consultant gave me, was that it's okay to quit. It's okay to be done with the breastfeeding relationship, but just don't quit on your worst day. On the worst day, just commit to getting through that day. And then when you've got some clarity, when you're not in the fog of the fight of struggling through that worst thing, then you can evaluate and make a really mindful decision about whether or not to continue or not. And so that advice that I got 12 years ago when my son was a baby is advice that I've implemented in other areas of my life. So whether it's a job, whether it's a friendship, whether it's a marriage, I think that really taking the approach of making a mindful and thoughtful decision about whether or not to move forward is the best thing to be able to do. And one of the things that allows you to do is to be prepared and to not impulsively, blurt out, "This is over," and then have to struggle to, get your ducks in a row after you've already made that announcement. So it really lets the separation, lets you be thoughtful and be sure that it's the right thing that you want to do, and to be able to do it on your own terms moving forward and not do anything that you would regret and escalate a conflict that doesn't need to happen. So the first thing is the emotional and mental aspects of divorce that we've just discussed. The second thing that for most people is, what is the top of mind thing. But for me, again, it comes behind that emotional aspect of preparedness for divorce. But the second thing is the financial considerations of divorce and the what happens with the money? How do I pay the bills? All of those considerations are really important to think about before you make that decision about moving forward. Because I think that for many of us, when we're in partnerships, there tends to be one person who handles the day-to-day finances, who could tell you how much money is in the checking account, how much money is invested with whom, and where, all of the money is. And then there's the other person who is responsible for other parts of the relationship. So maybe it's the day-to-day drop-off stuff with the kids. Maybe it's household management. Maybe it's that their career is so busy that they just don't have time to keep up with the finances. So if you are the financial person in the relationship, if that is primarily your responsibility, then it should be easy for you to gather up those documents that you're going to need in order to understand what all of the assets are that you and your spouse have in the relationship. If you are not that person, it can feel really scary when you're thinking about separation because you may not know, or you may think that your finances look one way. And when you start looking into it a little more, you may find that it's not the financial picture that you thought that your marriage was. So I do recommend, as one of the first things that you're doing, is learning more about the finances. And so, some of those things look like are, number one, getting a credit report on yourself, and having a financial conversation with your partner, to understand what the family finances look like. So again, whether you're staying together or whether you're separating, it is important for every party to know what the finances look like in the marriage, because you are a team. And even if you're not responsible for the day to day, you do want to keep an eye on what that financial picture looks like for your family, and to be involved in, the direction financially that your family is moving. And that is a mindfulness principle, as well as being deliberate and thoughtful about how we move our finances forward in the relationship. If we're staying together, what that looks like, and then if we're separating, what that means in terms of how we divide the assets. So once we know everything that we have in the relationship, what all of the assets are, whether they're separate, whether they're marital, you don't need to worry about trying to figure those pieces out yet. You just need to know what all of the pieces are and just find all of the information. And then once you've got that together, then I think that I would want you to be able to sit down with an attorney or spend some time doing some research on your own about understanding what equitable distribution looks like in North Carolina. If you were to separate, how would how would your assets be divided? And so, what the law says is that there are assets that are considered to be marital. And for most people, what that means is all of the work that we do during the marriage belongs to the marriage. So, if you're the spouse who is out working a job and earning an income, then all of that income that you're earning, that belongs to the marriage. If you are the spouse that is staying at home and you're raising the kids and you're, doing the day-to-day household management, you're keeping things running, your contribution to the marriage is all of those things. And any any financial contribution that you have as well, if you've got a part-time job, if you've got, you know, uh, if you sell the kids' clothes at the consignment sale, all of that income that's coming in, that belongs to the marriage. And so you're working on the same team. We believe that a marriage is a team where all of the work is being done for the benefit of that family unit, for those mutual goals that the two of you have together. So unless you've made other arrangements through a prenuptial agreement, then all of the work that you do during the marriage is going to be considered to belong to the marriage. So that means any retirement savings that you're creating during the marriage, any money that you're putting away, any brokerage accounts that you open, any real estate properties that you buy, all of those things belong to the marriage. There are very few exceptions to that. So that's how we classify property as marital is, does it belong to the marriage? If there is property that was inherited by one person or gifted to one person, if you have a family member who is very generous and writes you a $10,000 check each year as a gift for Christmas, and it's written only to you, and then you put that money in your separate bank account, and that's your separate money, and you don't mix it with marital money, then that could be considered to be your separate money. But besides those few exceptions, everything else in the marriage is considered to belong to the marriage, and those things are subject to be divided equally. So it doesn't matter if you've been the one who has been, generating the income and putting the money into the savings account, um, or if you've been the one who hasn't been able to do that, those things are considered to belong to the marriage. And that can be really hard, especially if you've been the saver in the relationship and the other person has been the spender, and you've both had, jobs and you've been working outside of the home. But you've been the one that's made more responsible financial decisions. That can be a real surprise to people a lot of times, because they may think that their retirement is separate if they've been working really hard to save money for retirement, but all of those things are subject to distribution. So that's an important piece that you would want to go through an analysis to have an understanding of what property is going to be taken with you um, as as the marital property is divided through equitable distribution. Then the other piece of that is support. So, we'll talk about custody and child support in just a minute, but for another financial consideration, it's not just about equitable distribution. How are the assets divided and how are the debts divided between the parties? But the other piece of that is, does somebody owe the other person a duty of spousal support? And in the family scenario that I just described earlier, where one person is working outside of the home and one person is doing the things that keeps the family going in the home, that's a scenario where spousal support is very likely in a marriage. So there is no formula for spousal support. And I think that that's really hard and confusing for people, because you can't just know what that number might look like of support for you. But you should know that if you have been a stay-at-home parent, or if you have been a stay-at-home spouse without children, if you've made sacrifices for your career in order to be a traditional wife, there's a big TikTok movement in the trad wife community, and there's this idea that that work may not be valued, and in some states it may not be valued, but in North Carolina it really is, and there is the opportunity for a stay-at-home spouse to be able to get an income from the spouse that's worked outside of the home after the parties separate, because of the sacrifices that they've made, because their career isn't going to be in the same position that it would have been had they not made the decision that they made as a couple for one person to stay at home. And also, if you've made career sacrifices for your spouse, maybe you're not a trad wife, or maybe you haven't, stayed at home, but are a teacher and you work a schedule that allows you to pick the kids up after school and be with them in the summer, and you haven't pursued um, more career advancement that would take you away from the family more, because you need to support your wife's career, you need to support your husband's career, and allow them the flexibility because their career requires that. You also could be considered for getting spousal support. So in North Carolina, we don't have a formula for the amount of support that you would get. But one thing that is somewhat consistent is the length of alimony. So just a rule that's not always applied, but it's a good, rough estimate is half the duration of the marriage is what we consider to be a reasonable length for an award of alimony or spousal support. So what I mean by that is if you've had a 13-year marriage, and you have been staying at home that whole time, raising kids, or you've been following a military spouse from base to base, and so you haven't been able to work, or your career's been impacted, so you're making less than your spouse, then for about 6.5 years, that the courts have said historically that that would be a reasonable amount of time for you to be able to get spousal support so that you can start working and you can start earning an income, so that you're able to build back up that career for the sacrifices that you made during the marriage. And if you're the supporting spouse, I think that that's an important thing for you to be aware of, is what that obligation might look like and what that length of time might look like. Spousal support in North Carolina, um, we only talk about alimony to be something that lasts for that amount of time, or if the party remarries, so the person that's getting the money, if they remarry, then they're not going to get that support anymore, even if there's more years left on the term. If you remarry or you cohabitate, you're not going to be entitled to spousal support anymore. If you die, then your estate's not going to be entitled to recover the remainder of the alimony obligation that was owed. If the supporting spouse dies, then they no longer have an obligation to continue that support. So their estate would not owe you that money anymore. So death, remarriage, cohabitation, those things end the obligation for alimony. Now, if you're the supporting spouse and you remarry, that does not end the obligation for your alimony to continue. So you still got to pay the alimony even if you have another spouse and you remarry. So understanding all of those financial things, and just sort of what the lay of the land is very important, so that you can make choices. Now, I don't think that I've never had a client come back to me later and say, gosh, I'm so glad that I didn't leave the marriage earlier, because of the financial stuff, that I stuck it out longer. Because here's the deal. If the marriage is going to end at some point in the future, really the financial piece of it, for most people, it's better to leave sooner rather than later, because the longer you wait, you're putting off your career even longer, or you're banking more potential time that you would owe spousal support down the road, or you're continuing to build up your retirement that's then going to be divided in half, or your spouse is going to continue to ring up debt that then you're going to be on the hook for, most likely, if you separate. So if you're not aligned financially in your marriage, it's probably going to make the most sense to, if you can't work through those problems, to go ahead and separate. I do recommend that if you are having financial trouble in the marriage, if you guys aren't aligned on your goals financially, that it is really important, if you're going to consider moving forward and staying together, that you consult with a financial professional, and that you guys work on getting a budget, getting on the same page, working to get out of debt if that's what you need to do, becoming more aligned on your financial vision of, starting a new company or investing in real estate, so that you guys are working on those dreams together, if you're going to stay together. Because, for most people, the financial goals in a marriage, they don't talk about them, and it's just sort of haphazard, because maybe they didn't talk about those financial things when they were kids with their parents, and so they don't know how to start those conversations. But I really encourage you to try to have those financial conversations with your spouse if you're going to stay in your marriage, because I think that it's really important to be able to build and dream and grow together and be aligned on those things. And if you're not aligned on those things, and you can't come to a place of feeling comfortable or safe financially with your spouse, and you have the financial resources to where the two of you decide that financially you'd like to be separate, even though you do want to stay married, then, let's talk about a postnuptial agreement, and let's consider using that as a tool to protect you financially if you are staying in the marriage. So when it comes down to it, with the financial things, the main thing is getting all the information and understanding what that's going to look like before you separate. Now, the third thing that we're going to talk about, and this is, for most of my clients that have kids, this is the most pressing thing, is co-parenting, custody, child support. What does all of that look like? And parenting within a marriage is tough, right? Like it's really hard if you and your spouse have different points of view on what child rearing should look like, if you're not aligned on those things. And I can tell you that for most people that are not aligned, that it's really important when you separate to have really clear boundaries and expectations about what co-parenting is going to look like, and what parenting in each home is going to look like. So I do think that figuring out this piece is really important for most people. If you were to separate, if we're working in an environment of trying to figure this out outside of court, people can agree to whatever they want to in terms of what child custody looks like, what that division of time between each parent looks like. If you can't work it out, you would have to go to court, and a judge would make that decision for you about what happens with the day-to-day schedule with your kids, what happens with decision making for your kid. And the standard that the courts use is what's in the best interest of the children. So we use a best interest standard in North Carolina to make decisions about child custody. And for most parents, that's what they want to do anyway, right? Like parents want what's best for their kids. And I'm a firm believer that parents are the best ones to make decisions for their kids, and that they know what's best. So if the parents can work together, even if they don't 100% agree, even if they're not exactly the same, I still think that parents working together come up with much better agreements than what the courts are able to give us in the very short amount of time that we have to let the courts get to know our family and let the courts get to know our kids and our schedules to understand what could be best for them. So as much as possible, especially when it comes to matters with children, I think it's best to try to negotiate and work something out between the parties. And there's so many different options. I think that this is what's surprising to so many of my clients when we have that first conversation, is just understanding all of the different ways that you can divide time and how you can work out the child custody matters between parents. So one thing that is somewhat popular is called a nesting schedule. So in the very beginning, like when you're in that first stage of talking about separating and you're starting to make some of those logistical considerations, some people do what's called nesting. And what that means is that the children stay in place and that the parents rotate in and out of the house. So some families might get an apartment that the non-custodial parent, the parent that's not with the kids, stays in, while the custodial parent spends time in the marital home with the kids. And then when that parent's time is over, they go to the apartment, and then that parent that was in the apartment then comes into the home to spend time with the kids. So I think that for some families, this is necessary, especially if you have neurodivergent children who aren't good with change and maybe need a little bit more adjustment for routines. This might be a tool that you use. But in my experience, again, I've been doing this for 19 years, nesting has a very short shelf life for most families. Number one, if you're sharing an apartment and a house with the person that you're separating from, that's just twice the arguments that could be about who left their clothes on the floor, who didn't change the sheets when they were leaving the home. It can double the mental load for the person who's responsible for filling the refrigerator in both homes if the parents aren't adjusting to taking that individual responsibility. And they fall back into those old patterns from the relationship. So I think that there have to be very clear boundaries and rules if you're considering nesting in the very beginning. But it can be a tool that's useful. And then when you're moving towards a more permanent schedule, you'll take into consideration, what's good for your kids. And for most families, what that means is something that looks similar to equal time with each parent. That's not in every family, but for a lot of families, it's important for the kids to get time in both parents' households. So you may spend time, the child may spend time with dad for 1 week and then spend time at mom's house for the next week. And they may alternate on a week-to-week schedule. We may designate certain days of the week that the children are in each household. So Monday and Tuesday night with mom. So every week we know that mom's got the kids on Monday night. She can take them to soccer practice. They can, get those new spelling words in and write them 3 times and use them in a sentence. And then dad knows that he's got every Wednesday and Thursday night with the kids. So he knows that he's preparing for that spelling test on Friday. So every Thursday night, they go get Chinese food and then study the spelling words for the test the next day. And you can start to develop those rituals and routines in that sort of schedule if we're doing that. And then we alternate the long weekends. This is one of the most popular schedules for families that I see. It works really well, especially if both parents are working outside of the home. So if you're moving into a situation where maybe you've been a stay-at-home parent, but you're going to start working outside of the home in separation, then this really allows you to know that you got the kids Monday and Tuesday night, but Wednesday and Thursday night, you can work late if you need to. You can catch up from the time that you weren't able to work late when you had the kids. You can go to a yoga class every Wednesday night if that's something that's important to you. You can go to a book club with your friends on Thursday. It can be really freeing, especially if you've been the parent that's had primarily, primary responsibility for the kids. Adjusting to that time of not having the kids with you is an adjustment. And again, that's where I think having your counselor in place can be really helpful, your own therapist that can help you to work through some of those changes. But for a lot of parents who have borne that full load, it can be really freeing to be able to spend some time being able to work late if that's what you need to do, or spend time reconnecting with friends because you're going to need them during this transition. And the equal time schedule, especially this 2255 schedule that we're discussing, can be really helpful for both parents to be able to have some time away from the kids. And one of the things that I've found is that parents report back to me that they're able to be better parents, more present parents during the time that they do have the kids, and they feel like that they're better parents in the 225 schedule than they were when they were trying to do everything and balance everything on their own. So for a lot of families, the equal time situation is what works best. And that's obviously where both parents are fit, not abusive, aren't dealing with untreated mental health or substance abuse issues that would not make them to be appropriate caretakers for the kids. But it doesn't mean that they're perfect parents or that both parents agree exactly what the parenting looks like. So in my opinion, I think that when you've got two good parents who want to do right for the kids, it's best to figure it out outside of court. If you go into court and both parents are fit and proper, most of the time you're getting equal time with the kids. So while that's most common, that doesn't work for every family. Sometimes, mom works out of town 4 nights a week, and we know that mom's not going to be able to have the kids overnight during that time that she's working out of town each week. And dad knows that it's best for the kids that when mom is in town, that they're able to spend time with her. Mom knows that when she has to be out of town, that it's best for the kids to be with dad. And so we adjust and we come up with a schedule that makes sense for that family. So you absolutely can make whatever decisions are best for your family if we're trying to figure it out outside of court. And we can help you with knowing what schedules have worked well for our clients' kids and which ones have been a little harder to adjust to. And that's the advantage of having an attorney to help you make some of these choices, is that we've been there, we've done that, we've seen which cases end up working well for people, which scenarios work best for people, and which ones are going to land you in court because they weren't well thought out or they weren't very practical in the long term. So we can also help you with tips for understanding smoother transitions between the two households. So making sure that you've got a backup lovey in each house. If you've got a kid that has a special lovey, making sure that you've got a plan for making sure that there's clothes at each household, how you're going to transition, dirty laundry, who's responsible for what. All of those little details you need to figure out, and you need to be able to work together with your co-parent to do that, because some of those little issues, again, will start repeating those patterns that you saw in the marriage, and they can escalate really quickly. And when you're not trying to stay married anymore, a lot of times they escalate to court. So avoiding court is really important to me for families. It's again, I've litigated for years. I've worked out cases for years, and what I see that works best for most families is to be able to figure it out and not fight in court and not escalate things in that way. So our practice is built on the idea that we think that grown people who want to be peaceful can be, and that most of the time we can work out our cases without having to set foot in a courtroom. And so we'll talk about that a little more. That is the next area that I wanted to discuss. The next thing that we'll talk about. So number 4 is, what's the legal process and what are your rights? That's the other thing that you're going to want to know before you decide to go. So we've talked about some of those things in the areas that we've discussed so far. But one of the most basic things, and I think the most confusing things, is to understand that in North Carolina, the absolute divorce, so what you think of as being completely free from the other person, the absolute divorce requires a minimum of a separation for a year and a day before you can file to get the absolute divorce. So that can sound really intimidating because you're like, I'm not going to be able to be free for a year. But realistically, all of those areas that we've discussed so far, so the custody agreement, figuring out spousal support, figuring out how to divide up all of the stuff, when we're going to sell the home, if we're going to keep the home, all of those things we can decide in a separation agreement, which I recommend to clients that we start having those conversations before you physically separate. You would want to start figuring out those things before you separate and start living separate. We might not finish up the agreement until each of you are living separate, but we do want to try to figure out all of those details well before that 1 year is up. So when you get to the end of the year, that's when the court is willing to sign the absolute divorce. So if we've done a separation agreement, if we figured out all of the other terms in the case, you guys are operating, living separate and apart as if you've never been married. Except for you have, because you divided the things, you've got the kids that you're sharing back and forth. But you get to make your own financial decisions. You can go buy a house if you want to, if we've executed a proper separation agreement and we've put provisions in there so that you can do that. You can do everything that you would want to do, except for a couple of things. The absolute divorce, the things that change when you get the absolute divorce is, number 1, you can remarry. So you cannot marry a new spouse until you have divorced your current spouse. So remarriage is one of the big 3 things that change when you get that absolute divorce. So you can remarry at that point. The second thing that changes is that you can file as single on your income taxes. So you are not single until the absolute divorce is granted for IRS purposes. So you can file married filing separately. You talk with your accountant about what's the appropriate thing to do if you guys are going to file jointly and figure out how you're going to divide any return or any obligation that you might have during that year of separation. But until you are legally divorced, you cannot file a single on your income taxes. And then the third thing that's different is you can no longer be covered as a spouse on an employee-sponsored insurance program after you guys are legally divorced. So that can be a big deal for a lot of families if you've been a stay-at-home parent and you're just looking for work, or you're going to continue to stay home for a bit and transition the kids gradually, as you go and re-enter the workforce. Having that year that you can stay on the other parents' health insurance, to stay on your spouse's health insurance, can be a really big deal for a lot of families to be able to do that. But once that divorce is granted, that is no longer an option. So those are some of the important legal considerations when it comes to the absolute divorce. One of the other big decisions, one of the biggest decisions that you're going to have to make during this is, how are we going to do this? What does this process look like? So we hosted another seminar where we go through the different ways to handle your divorce. But just hitting on the high points right now, your option is, do we want to fight about this in court and litigate this case? Or do we want to handle this case without litigation? And so I think a lot of people feel like that they don't have a choice, and they think that the only option is to go into court and get a custody order, or go into court and get their stuff divided. And you don't have to do that. We can handle everything outside of court by either you guys figuring it out on your own. So we call that a lot of times a kitchen table negotiation, where you and your spouse sit down at the kitchen table and you're like, okay, we're going to separate. What does this look like? And you write it out. What are those things? And you just figure it out together. And that works really well for a lot of families. So that's one method. Usually when we do it that way, the recommendation is still to get it formalized into a separation agreement. So that sort of takes us up to that next level of non-litigation settlement, which is that one of you hires an attorney to draft up what the two of you have agreed to. And so that attorney writes it all out in a legal format, and then the other person can then take that agreement, go see an attorney of their own to look over it, say, yep, this is exactly what y'all agreed to. This is what all these terms mean. Or, I don't think y'all were actually on the same page. What you thought that what you said and what she said aren't the same. And if that's the case, then sometimes we move to sort of the next level, which is just a negotiation between attorneys. You have an attorney, your spouse has an attorney, and then the two of them help the two of you to be able to resolve the issues. So sometimes we do that just by passing a draft back and forth. So it sort of starts, we stumble into it by kitchen table negotiation, that wasn't quite on the same page, and the attorneys just start negotiating back and forth. But sometimes we're really intentional about the process, and we know that we don't have the answers, and we know that we need professionals to help us. And so we might each go to attorneys and start the process there. And we might do what's called collaborative law, which is where I have my attorney, my spouse has their attorney, and then we all get together and we talk about what are our goals? How can we work together to create an agreement that works for our family that's now divided into two separate households? And that is a really great process that works well for so many families, is to go through the collaborative process, to bring in other professionals to help us, a financial expert, a child expert to help us to understand more about what the kids go through and what might be best for our kids, so we can craft really thoughtful, mindful agreements that work best for our whole family moving forward. So, collaborative might be a way. People ask about mediation a lot, and mediation is a really useful tool. And Where I find that mediation is sort of at its best and at its peak is for people who mostly agree, but still have a few issues that their attorneys, even when they're negotiating back and forth between their attorneys, they just can't quite figure it out. So before escalating the conflict anymore, sometimes it's a good idea to bring in a mediator that gets everybody together at the same time. And, generally the way that we do it is that one party goes with their attorney in one room, the other party is with their attorney in a separate room, and the mediator goes back and forth and really helps the two sides understand what the other side is wanting and helps them to get to an agreement that day so that we can just wrap it up and we can be done with those final issues that were sort of outstanding and there between the parties. They can figure it out and move forward. Then the other option is litigation. And litigation has a whole lot of exit ramps to where you don't have to fight all the time. Again, like for me, I just don't think that this is the best way to start a case. I think that the best thing to do is to commit to figuring it out and coming to a resolution. But sometimes that's not possible. And sometimes you have to escalate a case to litigation. That happens most often when one side has the substance misuse issues that we talked about, or untreated and or undiagnosed mental health issues that cause them to not be able to negotiate or talk through these decisions that need to be made. And so you need to take quick, immediate action to either protect your kids or protect your assets so that nothing happens to them. And certainly, one thing, even though I think that amicable agreements are best for most families, they're not right for every family. And I am the first person to say whether a case is good for trying to get to an amicable settlement or whether it's not a good fit. But I think that understanding all of the issues in the case and understanding where the points of contention might be are really important so that you can avoid litigation and so that your case that shouldn't be litigated doesn't end up being escalated because the two of you just aren't communicating or understanding each other, or somebody just does something that just doesn't make a whole lot of sense because they didn't know better. And that happens a lot of times. Somebody goes and like cashes out their 401k, which is like one of the worst things that you can do in most cases. But they get scared. And so when people are operating from a place of fear and not understanding all of the issues, that's how cases that should be settled end up being litigated and costing hundreds of thousands of dollars to fight when there really was no reason to fight to begin with. And that's what we work really hard to avoid here. And one of the things that I think is really important for that is really good communication between attorney and client. And so we work really hard with our clients to make sure that we're communicating and that we're understanding all of the issues and that you understand the issues and that you're empowered to make good choices as you move forward. And then, that comes down to, what's left. How do we plan for a positive future? If you're making the decision about separating, how do you plan to move ahead? And one thing that we think is really important for our clients is to use this opportunity of transition to consider your own personal growth and, again, working with all of your professionals to make sure that you've got a good plan for your finances moving forward. What's your independent financial goals going to look like? Like, what are you going to do? What have you always wanted to do that you haven't had the opportunity to do? Where do you see yourself in 6 months, in a year, in 5 years? What does that future look like? What does your career path look like when you get to be the only one to make that choice, when nobody else has a say and you're not having to make sacrifices for somebody else? And how can we help you to get there? So for us, it's really important to use this opportunity to be a transformation for you to consider things that maybe you haven't had the opportunity to think about. Or just have been too busy in life and with the fighting and the struggling to ever, commit to your own goals. Maybe you have new fitness goals. Maybe you haven't had the opportunity to go to the gym and you want to, start lifting weights and get really strong, or you want to take up a new, hobby. Maybe you want to do Brazilian jiu-jitsu and you never had the chance to go to classes because you always had the babies with you at home all day. Like, let's take this opportunity and let's prioritize your goals and make a plan for the future. And then really like building up that support network and making sure that you're being intentional, with your friends, with your family, to make sure that you've got people that have your back. And that means who's going to pick up the kids if you can't, right? It's your time with the kids. Who's gonna be backup for you in those cases? Who's gonna be your yoga buddy when you've got Thursday nights free now and you can go to yoga? And then also, again, like building that professional network. Who's your independent financial advisor that isn't the same one that you had with your husband? Who's your therapist that's going to help you with your mental health concerns? Who's your coach, right? Like, who's going to help you to reach your goals? Who's going to be your motivation? And really, for us, it's really important to help you to start thinking about those things and to connect you with other people who can help you to reach your goals. We're here for you, and we're ready and excited for your future when you're ready to take that next step. So, one thing that I want for all of us, as we're sitting here today and we're thinking about what comes next for us as an individual, we've talked through the five things that you want to think about before you make that decision to separate. The first is the emotional and mental health aspect of the divorce, thinking through that, thinking through the financial considerations of divorce, co-parenting and custody matters, thinking through those, thinking through what the legal process is, what's this going to look like, how long is this going to take, all of those things. We've thought through those things. And then the fifth thing that we thought about is, what does our future look like? When you're thinking about that, what does that look like when you're separated, when you've got your own goals that you can do? What does that look like if you're with your partner? Which future do you see? What's right for your life moving forward? If you're going to recommit to having that future with your partner, like we discussed earlier, I think that requires a lot of intentionality. It requires getting the right professionals in place to support you, making sure that you and your partner are having regular conversations, so that you don't end up back in the same place in 6 months or a year from now. Because if you're at this point right now and you're considering this, you can absolutely get through it if that's the right thing for your family, but it takes you putting in the work, both of you. And if both people don't commit to this, you're going to be right back here in 6 months. And I can tell you that I've never had somebody that's been in my office that says, gosh, I just wish, that I waited, that comes back to me and says, I wish I would have waited another 10 years to get my divorce. No, every single person, when the divorce is done, what they say to me is, if they've had reservations in the past and they've, done that extra lap with their partners, they say, gosh, like, I'm glad that we put in the work and tried, but I knew a year ago that it was time to separate and I stayed. And staying too long, after that it needs to end, that can be really hard, because sometimes you go from that place to where things can be amicable, you can have a good co-parenting relationship, to things escalating beyond that place and being in a place where it's going to take a whole lot more hard work to separate amicably and to be able to co-parent together. So, you know, I think that this is a very personal decision. It's a decision that you need to spend a lot of time thinking about and thinking through these issues that we've discussed today. I do recommend that you come in and you have a consultation with us, if that's something that you're interested in doing. For folks who attended the webinar today, we are offering a reduced cost consultation, and I'll put the link to that in the webinar chat. So you can just cut and paste that into your browser, and then you can schedule a time to come in. Again, a lot of people come in to see us and then they decide to use the resources that we have available to work on their marriage. And that is a wonderful thing, but they're not doing it from a place of fear. They're doing it from a place where they understand what their future looks like, their individual analysis. We go through their custody situation, what their family looks like, and we talk through what likely outcomes would be for their family in terms of custody, child support, alimony, equitable distribution. You have 19 years of it, my 19 years of experience that can help guide you and know what likely outcomes are so that you can make those choices about what moving forward is. And then if you do want to move forward, we help you put together a plan of when and how to have that conversation with your partner and what happens next, so that you're prepared, so that you've got control of the process and the process doesn't get away from you and you end up litigating in court and fighting in a way that isn't healthy for your family. But we're here whenever you want to meet. Please don't hesitate to reach out. We're always available to schedule a consultation. We can meet in person if that's where you like to meet. Our office is in downtown Holly Springs. If you want to meet over Zoom, we're happy to have a Zoom consultation if that's what's best for you. And then the third option is we can talk over the phone. If you need some anonymity, you need some privacy, and you don't really feel comfortable hopping on a Zoom or coming in person, we are glad to just have a phone conversation with you and really talk through. We call our consultations peaceful blueprint sessions because truly we spend a lot of time coming up with the plan that's best for your life and what moving forward looks like. So they last about an hour and a half. We block plenty of time so that we can talk and really get to know you and make those recommendations for you. So I look forward to getting to talk to you one-on-one and learn more about how we can help moving forward. I really hope that this has been useful for you. If so, please feel free to leave a review to let other people know that it's not scary to come to our seminars and that they should consider attending one of these if it's something that you found helpful. People find online reviews to be a really good way of knowing whether or not they should do something or not. So thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you spending your lunch hour with us, and I wish you all the best as you move forward, whatever decisions you're making right now.